Hi, this is Stephen Bible Crossroads, and tonight we're in Acts chapter 6 and 7. We're talking about the martyrdom of Stephen. And it's a fascinating story because Stephen, he was filled with the Holy Spirit. He was one of the disciples, or he was one of the deacons that were selected to take care of the distribution of food. And he was full of grace and power, and he's performing great wonders and signs among the people. So actually, he went out and he was sharing his testimony with people. He was sharing the good news with people. And he went into this place. It's called the Synagogue of the Freedmen, and it had Syrians and Alexandrians and other people. And basically, these were Jewish proselytes. And these people that he was speaking to were unable to cope with him. It says in verse 10, and yet they were unable to cope with the wisdom and the spirit with which he was speaking. Because he was speaking through the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit was helping him to testify of the goodness of God and what Jesus had done. And they were unable to cope with that, so they drug him off to the Sanhedrin. And there he faced judgment. Now, there's something interesting. When you face judgment like that, Jesus promised that the Holy Spirit will give you the words to speak. So all these things that that is going to be expressed in chapter 7 are things that the Holy Spirit has spoken through Stephen. And that's what's fascinating about this. This is what Jesus promised. He says, when they arrest you and hand you over, and that's exactly what happened to Stephen here, he says, do not worry about what to say, and say what is given you in that time. For you are not the one speaking, but it is the Holy Spirit. Now that's something, isn't it? So all these things, all of chapter 7 is exactly what the Holy Spirit was speaking through Stephen. And the fascinating thing about it, you can see the historicity of it. I guess that's the right word, isn't it? It's a historical perspective of Israel. This is what happened. And there were certain faithful men throughout the way, outstanding leaders, and there was rebellious Israel. And that's the way it worked. He starts off by talking about Abraham, how he received the covenant of circumcision. And the interesting thing there is God told Abraham, hey, get up go to this land where I'll tell you to go. And what did Abraham do? Well, he just got up and started walking. He left the homeland of Ur, which is in southern Iraq, and walked all the way to Canaan. That's a long ways. And he just did this because he wanted to walk with God. So he had to get up and start walking. And from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then after Jacob, he had the 12 patriarchs who became the 12 tribes of Israel. And of course, one of those were Joseph, and his brothers were jealous. They sold him into bondage in Egypt. And this was God's plan to take care of Israel. But Joseph, an amazing story there, he doesn't complain about it, even though he's been severely mistreated by his brothers and everybody else just about. And he doesn't complain. You know, he just doesn't complain. He just keeps on doing the best he can where God put him. And he's a very faithful individual to God. This is amazing. And so anyways, Joseph went down there to prepare a place, and God puts him second in charge of all Egypt. And we all know the story how he saved Israel by creating, saving up the food of Egypt for 7 years, so the rest of the people in that area had food to eat. And Israel moves to Egypt, and there they become a great nation, of course, and Moses is born, another great leader who receives the commandments from God. And it says he had help of an angel being one who brings a message. And that message he received the burning bush. And all throughout the wilderness generation, as they went out, they were actually following after Christ. In Corinthians 10, Paul writes this. He says, for I did not want you to be unaware, brethren, that our fathers were all under the cloud and passed through the sea, and all were baptized in Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they were drinking from a spiritual rock which followed them, and the rock was Christ. You get that? They were following Jesus in the wilderness. Nevertheless, with most of them, God was not well pleased, for they were laid low in the wilderness. And that's interesting there, because that's the testimony of that Stephen gave, is that Moses was following after Christ, basically, in the wilderness, the pillar of fire and the pillar of cloud, and they were actually following after Christ. And Moses also said that in Deuteronomy that God shall raise up for you a prophet like me from your brethren. He's talking about Jesus. And throughout this time, these people were in just rebellious against, you see the rebellion against Moses, and there was a rebellion against Joseph, and they were always rebelling against stuff, you know. And there were certain people that followed in faith and did what was right, but there wasn't many. There certainly wasn't many. Of all the people that died in the wilderness, there was only 2 that made it into the promised land, Joshua and Caleb. The rest of them perished in the wilderness. Amazing. Out of probably millions, only 2 made it. And Stephen concludes his message in verse 51, after he goes through and gives the history of Israel. He concludes his message with this. He says, "You men are stiff-necked and uncircumcised in heart, and ears are always resisting the Holy Spirit, and you are doing just as your fathers did. Which one of the prophets did your fathers not persecute? And they killed those who had previously announced the coming of the righteous one, whose betrayers and murderers you have now become. You received the law and as ordained by angels, and yet you do not keep it." And at that, they rose up and they drug Stephen out and they stoned him. You know, and the apostle, then Saul became the apostle Paul, was one of those. Amazing. But here's the thing. Jesus ties us all together, and he says the same thing happened to him, same exact thing. He called these folks snakes, you brood of vipers. How can you escape being condemned to hell? This is why I'm sending you prophets, sages, and scribes. Some of them you will kill and crucify. He's talking about himself. He was crucified, and Stephen apparently, because he was brought out and martyred. And some of them you will flog in your synagogues and hound from town to town, so that all the righteous blood shed on earth will be charged to you, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah the son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the sanctuary and the altar. I assure you, all these things will come on this generation. In 70 AD, Rome came in and God just destroyed Israel. Anyways, the point is, this martyrdom that occurred, Stephen spoke the words of God. The Holy Spirit was speaking through Stephen, and this is a fascinating review of the history of Israel. And the same thing was going on, goes all the way back to Cain and Abel, how Abel gave his gift of faith, and Cain gave his works from his hands to God, and the works of faith was acceptable, and the works of his hands was not. And it's the same thing. These men are still killing people of faith, just like they killed Abel, just like they killed Jesus. And that's what they do, because they cannot cope with the spirit that's speaking. So they kill those people to get rid of them. That's all they can do. And I think another point is that we all have a heart of stone. I can remember resisting God. I didn't want anything to do with him. You know, I was happy doing my own thing, and it was terrible. But I'll tell you what, when God actually softened my heart, then it was, I know you exist now. I was blind, and then I could see. I was spiritually awakened so I could see him. And he did it when I was riding a motorcycle, a dirt bike, and I hit a steel cable with my neck. And I got up off the ground, and one thing, my neck wasn't sore or broken, or I was still alive. But the biggest miracle occurred when I realized that God was real. And he was right there in front of me, and he's the one who saved my neck. And basically, the Holy Spirit comes and he convicts us of our sin of unbelief, the righteousness of Jesus, and the judgment to come. Those are the three things that the Holy Spirit convicts us of. And I knew that if I turned away from Jesus at that point, I would have a hard heart, and I would be without him forever. But if I accepted him, if I accepted Jesus, he would help my heart to be turned into a heart of flesh, so I could love God, so I could do what he would have me do. And that's the decision that we all have to make. Do we want Jesus or not? You know, and I want Jesus, and I'm far from perfect, that's for sure, but I sure want Jesus. You know, I just wanted to share that with you. And I was amazed by the story here that was given through the Holy Spirit, through Stephen, right before his death. And it's just a marvelous testimony of the condition of Israel, really. And he calls them out. And there had been many people, many Jewish people who had turned towards the Lord because he softens their heart. But apparently these folks had stiff-necked and they're uncircumcised in heart. And they resist the Holy Spirit. They turn away from God. And that's the one unpardonable sin. You know, if you turn away from the Holy Spirit, you have no hope, because he's the one who brings you into alliance with the blood of the Lamb so you can be saved. Yeah. Anyways, I pray this helps. And if you do want to follow after God, all you got to do is ask. You know, that's it. Just ask Jesus to help you out. Anyways, I hope this blesses your heart, and we will talk to you later. Bye.